G'day, patrons, and welcome once again to Two Jacks, featuring Jack the Insider. That's me and Hong Kong Jack. How are you today, Jack?
Excellent, excellent. Good to hear from you.
Very good to hear from you too. And today we want to kick off with a chat about COVID and the swing in the narrative. Zero COVID is all over, or is it? And lockdowns are on the way out. Well, we certainly hope so. What's the view in Hong Kong, Jack?
Well, we're still very much in the zero COVID zone, and we will be for a year, I think. And we have no local cases basically because of that. But that is damaging the business community here because it's very hard to get in and out, and people are starting to leave. So it's a some people think it's a success, and some people don't. What I've noticed over the last week is something on Twitter, which is a a new position, really, or it seemed I thought it was a new position, but people who were saying, well, look, I'm pro-vaccine, but I'm anti-vaccine mandate, I'm anti-vaccine passports, and I'm mask skeptical. And I think I'm in a small minority. And then everyone piles back in and says, nope, that's what I am as well. And it seems to be the new popular position. So people are happy to get vaccinated themselves, but don't want to tell anybody else what to do.
Yeah, look, I just wrote a column for The Australian, just published on Christmas Eve. And in that, I talk about countries like Australia with high rates of vaccination. That really there's been the creation of a compact between the people and the state. And the people have said, well, we'll take the risk on vaccination. And there is a very small risk, but it is risk nevertheless. And we will vaccinate in big numbers. And that gives us the right to basically determine our own futures and how we want to respond to the changes to the Omicron variation or variant, I should say, coming through. So this is the big thing for me that we can talk about mask mandates, and New South Wales took them away and then put them back in, which all seem to be really just, ugly sort of politics. But really, while the mandates were gone, most people were masking up anyway. Most people made the choice, you see. That's the thing. We want to give people the information so they can do their own risk assessment according to their own circumstances, and then they can make their own choices.
Well, certainly here the masks thing happened because people did it themselves. And long before there was a government mandate, you couldn't get onto a bus here or onto a train without a mask on. And this wasn't a question of the law. The bus driver wouldn't let you on. This was just people making individual choices, and people didn't want you in their shop without a mask on before the mask mandate came out. So this has been largely, the government's always been behind the ball here. This has largely been driven by the local population.
Yeah, same here. And so, pubs and clubs and things, that they can continue to ask for proof of vaccination. And I got no problem with that. If they've risk assessed their business around that they really want people who are fully vaccinated or doubly vaxxed or triple vaxxed, then they can make their own decisions, and they have to live with the commercial consequences of those decisions. And that's just the way it's going to go. So really, I maintain the argument that the countries with high rates of vaccination, therein lies the proof that people have an awareness of the risk, and given the right information from the right sources, they will continue to make those risk assessments and choose wisely. Having said that, that some people will always make bad choices, and some people might make bad choices every now and then. That's just the way. That's just the way society works. Complex societies work, and people people who continue to make good choices, they're entitled to give those people a swerve.
They are. Yeah, you're more in touch with what's happening in Australia than I am, but I can tell you that in the UK and the US, I think my assessment is that there is no appetite for heavy restrictions any longer. It seems to have gone away. the
There is that sense here, which means potentially much of the world is due to with Christmas with Christmas dinners and family gatherings and all those sorts of things. There is a likelihood of super spreader events. The prevailing data indicates that Omicron is far more infectious and transmissible, but its sort of rule of viral behaviour is that the more transmissible you get, then the less lethal the viral infection will be. Now, it's early days, but that's the way that the data seems to be trending. There are some really big concerns around that. You've got the South African data, for example, indicates that children under the age of 2 made up 10% of hospitalisations, and that's in a country with very low vaccination rates. But that won't really matter with children under the age of 2; they're not going to be vaccinated for COVID. So those are main. Those are some big issues for all of us going forward. Obviously, the most vulnerable people in our society are the very, very young, and we need to look after them.
the numbers from the UK. I just had a look early this morning, and I think it's around 100,000 a day
Yeah.
of the Omicron infections, but their ICU and hospitalisation rates seem to be holding up pretty well.
Yeah. I mean, look, again, we get back to the grave fear being that public health systems are overwhelmed
Will
and
collapse,
cannot cope, and you've got people being triaged in car parks, but it doesn't seem to be going that way. I mean, it's completely overwhelmed Delta in the United States. It took a week, just 7 days, to become the prevailing variant in the United States. It's extraordinary, the transmission.
This is the history of these sort of pandemics, though. This is what happened. In the end, they peter out because a variant that's very transmissible but low in lethality takes over.
Yeah, that you have widespread transmission and infection, and that's where you get to herd immunity, or to a
Yes,
point. Yeah, to a very significant point.
I think that's my reading of it is that's the history of the Spanish flu.
Pretty much, it just petered out. I mean, it did. It's not gone as long as COVID. It was far more lethal, of course, but it
And far more lethal to the young.
yeah, absolutely. But I mean, it wiped out. It's still probably around 100 million people,
Yeah.
and it did just sort of dwindle. It was kicked along too by more travel around, more global travel than had been the case in history by returning servicemen going home to places
Yeah.
like Australia and Africa and the United States and going back to Asia and places like that, and that's why it spread so quickly. But really, it was all done and dusted within about less than 2 years. The the little information we have is that in contemporary terms of modern medicine is that pandemics will last about 3 years. So hopefully,
So do you think there's any appetite in Australia for lockdowns? And
no, none whatsoever. And if we did have lockdowns, it would be one, a serious breach of faith on that sort of compact that I talked about before, with people receiving their vaccines in big numbers. It would be a serious breach of faith, and there would be great unrest around it. I mean, I don't like much of these sort of anti-lockdown protesters, but I might be inclined to join them if there was another lockdown.
I noticed on Twitter last night and this morning there's still a rump of people who are very, very keen to have the government tell them what to do.
Yeah, look, it's complicated, isn't it? What we do have, I suppose, in this case is that people are pretty panicky about this variant. We don't have a lot of data in at the moment. So, for example, if you wanted to think about what long COVID implications might be with Omicron, there is no data. I mean, there's just nothing. So people have been living in, a protracted period of anxiety, and then this new variant comes along.
You can't have got long COVID from Omicron because it's only about a month old.
That's what I mean.